British Columbia, the first power plant actually in the West Kootenay, consuming all their own waste to make electricity, lived in the village of South Slocan long before there was West Kootenay Light and Power. Unfortunately, in 1910, there was a year of high water. All the logs floated a little faster than they had planned, ran down the river, knocked down all the bridges, and wound up right through Spokane, ran down the Columbia, wrecked so many bridges inside the United States that they were bankrupt in one day. Shut the mill, fled, and started the NHL. Winlaw Logging Company in Winlaw, they had a sawmill where the school is, and everything was going great. Same year, 1910, after the flood was over, it got kind of warm, they had a big fire, sawmill burned down. And that's how come the timber on Perry's Ridge is exactly, if you count the years back, it's 110 years old. The next major event that happened was the Burns Lumber Company, which had a planer in Tagum, 1920. Tagum near Nelson, the valley was full of sort of little mills, portable mills. They made rough lumber, they hauled it to Tagum, they planed it, and sent it into Nelson to be sold. In the 1930s, Burns closed the Tagum planer mill and moved it right here, where you're sitting, essentially. And Katy Lumber Company was logging a camp up that road over there. And the biggest outfits around was Katy Lumber Company at Camp 4 and Burns at Little Slocan Lakes. The planer mill came here. They were planing 30,000 feet a year, and all the little mills were feeding Burns. In 1942, 1950, this is where history starts to change. Burns Lumber here in Passmore was awarded tree farm license number 3. Number 3 is a very low number. We have like tree farm licenses all over the province. One of the first was right here, and it is essentially the Little Slocan Valley, which was here to feed Burns Lumber Company right here in Passmore. And at that time, there were 38 logging contractors in this valley. Some of the people in this room might be from those families. There were 17 sawmills operating in the valley. There were 2 really big companies, one in the lower valley, being Burns, and one Big Bend Logging Company up at Wilson Creek. All the rest of the wood was sold at ranger stations at auction. They, the Forest Service would go out and find some lumber, and then some logs, and then they'd invite everybody to the Winlaw post office, and people would go and they would bid for wood and drive up the price, and free enterprise worked. And we called wood a common property resource. That means everybody owned it, everybody had the right to bid on it, and it would then go through some little sawmill and wind up down here in Passmore to be planed and go off to the marketplace. In 1955, the big logging companies, Big Bend in the north and Burns in the south, they were developing the wood that needed roads, and they had enough money to build the roads. The valley walls, that 58% of what is now or was once the public sustained yield unit, the valley walls needed more roads, and the 38 little loggers and the 17 sawmills, they didn't have much money. A brilliant man in Nelson working for the Forest Service named Ray Gill wrote a report, and he called it the Proposal for a Public Working Circle in the Slocan Valley. And basically what he said is, you know what, the Crown owns the trees, the Crown should build the roads. And then we should put up the trees for sale. And because it's young timber, we should mark the trees, just the ones that we should take out, and we should selectively log the valley. And then everybody can come down here and bid on these logs, and the only restriction will be you have to live in the valley. In the public working circle, you have to live there in order to work. In 1958, 3 years later, everything changed. A guy named Axel Erickson came here from Portland. He bought out Burns Lumber. He had sort of an American point of view. Instead of cooperating with those 17 sawmills, buying their rough lumber and planing it, he thought it would be a better idea to buy them out. So we began the age of consolidation here in the valley. Mr. Axel Erickson, Erickson Lumber, right here in Passmore, didn't like this idea of the public working circle. He thought that somebody should actually control all that area in order that there be efficiency. He opposed Mr. Ray Gill's plan for a public working circle. The provincial government thought about it for 2 more years, and in 1960 they came out with a law called the Licensee Priority System. This changed everything in British Columbia, everywhere, forever. It said if you were one of those 38 loggers that had logged in the last 2 years, you could have a quota that says you could log just exactly as much in the next years as you had logged in the last year. And if you had a broken leg last year, it didn't log too tough. You didn't get any licensing priority. And they said quota will be saleable. That means if you own quota and you don't really want to go to work and they got some money they can buy you out, then you never work again. That was perfect for the consolidation of quota in this valley. That was perfect for Axel Ericsson. That allowed the consolidation and efficiency that he thought would work. It works in the United States. And by the year 1964, all of the other 17 sawmills were gone, and the 34 operators had all been bought out or sold out or closed down their operations, and Axel Ericsson controlled the whole thing. The moment that he controlled the whole thing, Axel Ericsson Lumber Company here in Passmore, sold to CPR, that famous Canadian investment company. They created Pacific Logging, moved the sawmill from Passmore to Slocan. They ran it for a little while, sold to a family in New York, and that became Triangle Pacific. Triangle Pacific operated for a little while, sold to Ike Barber, and became Slocan Forest Products. Slocan morphed into a thing called Canfor, and then Canfor took most of the wood away and sold it to some local folks, and it is now Springer Creek Logging. How am I doing, man?
Great.
How much time? Oh, great. Okay. We have traced the story in 100 years from where we went from a time where it belonged to all of you, and you could get up tomorrow morning and decide you wanted to be a logging contractor and bid on the wood that grew where you live, to a time, starting in 1964, where you couldn't actually work on that mountain unless you worked for Axel Ericsson or the long succession of companies that came after Axel. Now, in 1975, I was very young, and I really liked killing trees, and I didn't like working for the people I had to work for. So I was a little bit grumpy about this idea that the common property resource was controlled by one company. I worked for Slocan, it was then called Triangle Pacific, and I went to the mill and I was arguing, well, how comes these people in New York own all these trees? Why can't we go to work? And why isn't it like the old days, the good old days, the romantic old days where we could all buy the trees and work, and somebody in New York couldn't because it was a public workmanship. There was a bit of a debate in the valley, and at that time, one of the guys I knew at Slocan was a Sawyer. Sawyer is an artist. Sawyer is the guy who takes, prior to the age of computers, a Sawyer was the person who looked at the log and figured out how to cut it so that the quality would come out, the value would come out, and it took a very experienced person to be that kind of an artist, and Chuck Warren was that kind of experienced person, and he was this young 25-year-old kid saying, I don't understand how come this company controls all the trees. And he says to me, you don't know anything, you don't understand the history, and your ideas are all wrong. This is the best possible world where we all work for Triangle Pacific. And I said, Chuck, how can you say that? He said, do you understand how come we have cement foundations under our houses? And I thought, maybe it comes in a cement truck. I don't know. We all get together, we pour cement. I don't know. What does cement under our houses have to do with losing the trees? And Chuck said, well, before Triangle Pacific and consolidation, we used to work for some guy down the road, and sometimes the guy would go bankrupt. Sometimes you'd get hurt and there'd be no compensation. Sometimes it'd be a bad market year, and the product when it came out in the spring had no value. We had to follow the work, and because we had to follow the work, nobody bothered to pour a foundation because our home was wherever someone would give us a job, and it only worked when they actually had the money. Once we consolidated into one company, then we thought we're going to actually live somewhere, raise our kids somewhere, and we all went out and poured cement foundations underneath our houses. It is important, I think, that we understand our history so we think about where we're going. We ended the common property idea of the hill in 1964. We took the common property of salmon and halibut and crab and cod in 1995. and we turned it into quota, that is sale, and made it private property. We are thinking now of doing pretty much the same thing with creeks and rivers. And we're thinking about doing it with land. And the question is, the adventure of owning it ourselves and maybe going broke, the permanence of having a cement foundation, of having somebody else control it, and we work for them. And I kind of think that this particular